Yo, what's happening everybody, King GBL here, and welcome back to a brand new Go Bat League video. Today I'm going to be showcasing some of the best budget builds in the Ultra League. If you want to make your first ever Ultra League team, or if you're trying to kind of flesh out your team a little bit with some decent builds that could be doing quite well in this meta, we're going to have a look at that today, and we're going to have a look at the overall meta to see what sort of Pokemon you should prioritize building and try to give you as best a chance as possible in the Ultra League without busting the wallet out or of course building Pokemon that are super XL. I will suggest some Pokemon that are slightly XL or that are very low cost candy, which you can look to build, but of course we'll focus more on the Pokemon like Community Day Pokemon we've had spawning in the wild quite recently, and things that are pretty easily to obtain for you. If you do enjoy these types of videos, drop a like in the video, it helps out an absolute ton. What we're going to do at the end of the video is make like a tier list of the best main builds, secondary builds, semi-XL Pokemon, of course 1 kilometer bodies, and some legendary Pokemon that you can invest your rare candy into. And with that being said, let's hop into it. So having a look at the overall meta in the Ultra League, a lot of people have very expensive teams. You're going to see an absolute ton of Registeel, Steelix, and Cobalion, and of course Cresselia. These Pokemon are just going to be absolutely everywhere, and they're basically unavoidable. You will have to build your teams against these Pokemon, and especially Steelix these days. I think a lot of people are grinding XL Candy currently to build Steelix. Very, very broken Pokemon in this meta. As you can see, it can beat quite a lot of the top meta. And even things like Swampert, it's not very comfortable for Swampert once you apply a couple of debuffs. And if you get one Dragon Tail's advantage, it can actually beat a fighting grass type like Virizion. Steelix is super broken, so I think that'll be like a focal point of what we're going to try to build against here today. Now in the Ultra League, like I said, you'll see these top 3 Pokemon quite a lot. You will see a decent amount of Cresselias. You're not going to see Zygarde for quite some time. And of course Girautinas are just always going to be everywhere in the Ultra League. Virizion here is ranked 12. If you do have a Virizion, and if you do have the rare candy, this could be a very good Pokemon to invest in. As you can see, we've got a new rank 13 Greedent, which looking at this Pokemon, it's level 44 to 50. So if you wanted to make a semi-XL build, like a Hundo or a Lucky Trade or something, Greedent could be quite a decent option, purely because it's so spammy that even against things like its hardest counters, like counter users, you can spam off a lot of damage, and it's such a tricky Pokemon to deal with. So let's have a look at these Pokemon. We're going to type in ! Legendary, which will exclude any legendary Pokemon from the list. Steelix here, you can build this between level 42.5 and 50. It is definitely much more preferred if you build it as level 50. However, if you're trying to build yourself an Ultra League roster, you maybe could look to Purify, a Hundo or something like that. It's definitely a possibility if you're not really looking to make a big investment. I think if you do go for Steelix, you do go for the best one, which of course would be more XL Candy. Stick it as your buddy and try to build it over time. The first really good one here that I'm seeing is Swampert. Now the really good thing about Swampert is, if you actually have a look at this Pokemon, we're going to do Swampert versus the Ultra League, and we're going to stick this into Matrix. I'm going to put these IVs here as like 12, 14, 13, just something random. The one on the top here is going to be rank 1. As you can see, the poorly ranked one picks up, a couple of matches. It loses a couple of matches, but genuinely it's like not that much worse, and you lose a couple of bulk points, right? But it's nothing like too crazy. Like, you're going to lose these matchups anyway. These are losing matchups. You wouldn't CMP against Venusaur, which may be handy if you're trying to get off a last second Earthquake. But honestly speaking, if you have a look at this Pokemon, there's really not a ton of difference, and you're actually picking up Pidgeots in the zeros, Scrafty, you're picking up of course all our Swamperts and winning CMP against those, Swampert being quite a popular option, and as you can see in the 2s, having more attack weighted IVs will actually give you wins against Steelix, which you otherwise wouldn't have. With this Pokemon right here, super budget build, you can build almost a Hundo, and it'll perform better in certain cases, if not the same as the normal one. Now looking on down the list here, we've got Greedent, like I said. Aurorus is a very interesting Pokemon. However, the meta is just so dominated by Registeel and a Cobalion, and of course the newly buffed Steelix. Like, Aurorus is in a very tricky spot, and it's not a Pokemon I'd recommend building right now. I think in future iterations of the Ultra League, this Pokemon could be very strong. It's maybe one you just put on the back burner for now, but I think it has a lot of play in certain matchups. As you're seeing, we've got Double, which is going to be a Hundo XL, very difficult to build. Likewise with Mandibuzz. Now, Poliwrath Shadow and Poliwrath here, I've personally just got a normal one built. This Pokemon, in my personal opinion, is probably the best budget Pokemon to build. As you can see, it goes between level 37.5 and 49.5. Now, if you were to build just like a straight up Hundo, I think it would still be very decent in the Ultra League. Now keep in mind, counter is elite fast TM, and of course with Swampert, it's an elite charge TM. And as you can see, the one with more attack actually picks up more matches here in the 1s. In the 0s, you lose Giratina, Golisopod, and Ninetales. Of course with Powder Snow, not Charm. But you do pick up Poliwrath and Swampert in the 0s. There are definitely some differences. I think I prefer a bulk-weighted Poliwrath. So if you played Community Day and you got the extra XL candies, I think it could be worth the investment. I built a very defense-weighted one, and it cost me about 250k dust. Pretty halfway to XL, right? Definitely very worth it. Now, as you're seeing, you lose some bulk points here. You lose some bulk points against Empoleon, Gira, Golisopod, Pidgeot, Stunfisk, which is not any problem at all, Charm, and Toxicroak. That's absolutely fine, but you do actually get a decent amount of break points with it. You're doing extra counter damage to Charizard, Swampert, Umbreon, Walrein, Deoxys, Empoleon, Gramble, Mandibuzz, Poliwrath itself. So, if you wanted to make a budget build of Poliwrath, it's definitely possible to do it below level 40, however I do recommend going at least halfway XL with this Pokemon. Now I'd like to give a quick mention to Pidgeot here. This Pokemon is extremely strong in the Ultra League. You can debuff with Feather Dance, and you can of course land a ton of damage with Brave Bird, Walls, Giratina. It is a level 50, and it is a Hundo. You could get away with a 15, 15, 14 or something like that, but I do recommend of course building the Hundo. This is a 1 kilometer body, so it means that if you're using it as your body, you can get up to 80 candies per day with this Pokemon if you're using a Poffin, or if you're getting your body excited. So if you're looking to build some XL Pokemon, Pidgeot is super annoying. I had a match against Steelix the other day, and the match actually came super close. If I landed one more Brave Bird, the opponent was going to get super low, and it actually puts you in a position to comfortably farm down whatever Pokemon you lost switch against, and it puts you in a really good position. Even though this meta is very full of Steel types, there's a ton of Pokemon trying to counter them as well, like Virizion, and this thing just completely walls it, so highly recommend Pidgeot, but of course it will be more expensive and a more of a long-term investment. Now Gliscor here, this is a Pokemon I don't personally have built. It's going to be one of the next Pokemon that I build, because as you can see, level 35 to 46. Now I think most of you guys probably do have this Pokemon as like a research IV, because they're a little bit harder to come by. You don't really see this Pokemon in the wild too often, of course Gligar. So that could be something that you could look to build in the future. We're going to have a quick look at the rank 1 versus 10, 14, 11, just some kind of random IVs, just to get a kind of feel of it. As you can see, this one, it loses Charizard in the one shield scenario. You get some attack, wing attack breakpoints, which is quite nice, on Deoxys, Charizard, Gramble, Muk, Poliwrath, Swampert, Trevenant, Venusaur, which can help you farm those Pokemon down a little bit faster. You do lose a few bulk points, Aurorus, Empoleon, Escavalier, Gramble, Guzzlord, Tapu Fini. The Tapu Fini one, and of course the Aurorus one could be quite tough. Empoleon's a pretty uncommon Pokemon, but it may be something that can affect that matchup. Having a look here in the 2-shield scenario, you definitely do lose out in a couple of matches by not going XL with this Pokemon. So I think if you're going to build this Pokemon, trying to get it like semi-XL could be quite a decent idea. The rank 1 here is 0, 14, 15. Gliscor is quite unique in this meta, because of course it's a ground and flying type. So it kind of deals with all of the Steelixes, Reggies, and Cobalions, but also deals with their counters, right? So this thing is going to be doing super effective damage to things like Golisopod here. It's going to be tricky against Swampert and Poliwrath, but you can apply a lot of damage to those. It's going to do super well against Virizion, so I think Gliscor could be a really nice pick right now. Now speaking of really nice pick, Golisopod. This is a Pokemon that walls off a lot of the counters to the Steel types. It walls Swampert, it walls Walrein, which of course Walrein is another great budget pick we will get into. Shadow Claws do super effective to Jellicent, which can be very awkward for it. Despite having resisted liquidations, the Shadow Claws and liquidations really add up, and it's really not that bad of a matchup. Golisopod is really quite a nice core breaker at the moment. You're beating all our sort of budget Pokemon, beating Cresselia, beating Cobalion. Definitely very nice, and I think if you take this into the 2-shield, or at least shield up more than they do, you will be able to take out Giratina and Trevenant. Absolutely. With X-Scissor, you can definitely get through those matches. Of course, maybe Liquidation on the Giratina. And I think likewise with Scrafty, if you take that into a longer shielding scenario, you definitely win that match. Tapu Fini, a little bit tricky. However, the liquidations do add up, and they really do have to go for a Moonblast in order to take you out. So I think this is a really good pick. Again, Charizard can be a little bit tricky. However, if you farm something down, come out with energy, a liquidation will almost take out a Charizard. So I think Golisopod is a really nice pick. And as you're seeing here, level 27.5 to 33.5. Definitely a very, very strong one, and one I think that's worth building. Once again, we have Walrein right here. Walrein has always been a staple in the Ultra League. It does pretty well against Charizard. It has the ground coverage, of course loses to Jellicent, Pokemon with grass coverage and things like that. It's more of like a utility Pokemon, which is always a nice one to build. This Pokemon, it had an event recently where you could get Icicle Spear and Powder Snow. So I think Walrein, it's an okay Pokemon to build. I think this current meta is a little bit hostile towards Walrein, unfortunately, because of course we have a ton of Steel types. You can look to land the Earthquake. This could be your anti-flyer Pokemon in the team. Maybe run this in the lead and have 2 Pokemon that are weak to flying in the back. That could work pretty decently, I suppose. But in general, I think Walrein's a little bit tricky at the moment. But nonetheless, Walrein's always going to be a good Pokemon in the Ultra League. So having a look down for these here, Gliscor again, Hitmontop. Very overhyped in my opinion. Scrafty. I don't think it's a great meta for Scrafty. Despite having the steel types, you take a lot of super effective damage from counter. Dragonite is again a very, very cheap Pokemon. Again, we do have a lot of steel types, but superpowers are no joke. So if you do happen to have a Shadow Dragonite, you can build this up to level 23 to 26, which is absolutely ideal. A very, very low cost Pokemon. And yeah, Shadow Dragonite, super oppressive, will beat a lot of the Pokemon that are not steel types, right? You can just farm a lot of stuff down. Almost anything on this list right here, to be fair, you can basically farm down with the exception, of course, of Walrein. You can farm it down with the Dragonite. So really good Pokemon for taking switch advantage and RPSing the opponent. So I think if you have this Pokemon available, even the non-Shadow, I think it can be quite strong. Now again, we have another Community Day Pokemon, Greninja. This Pokemon, it's very, very spammy. So I think like you can't really go too far wrong with it. You're spamming out Hydro Cannons left, right and center. I think you just can't go wrong with it. I do think Swampert is better, but if you happen to not have a Hydro Cannon Swampert and you need something, this could be quite a decent option. However, things like Cobalion still hit it with super effective double kicks. Registeel can one-shot it. Steelix will debuff it into Oblivion. It's quite a glassy Pokemon, glassier than Swampert for sure. Use it at your own risk, but I think this Pokemon Up Energy is just an absolute machine. It's so hard to deal with whenever you don't have a good answer to it. Again, Charizard. I'm putting this Charizard right up at the very top of my list here of the best Pokemon to build. I think this Pokemon, it's probably your number 1 or 2 Pokemon. You just cannot go wrong with this Pokemon. Even in some of its worst matchups, if the opponent has a Shadow Swampert, you can look to flip those matchups if you land a Blast Burn. With Tapu Fini, wing attacks plus 2 Blast Burns pretty much takes them out. So if you're up a shield, in almost any scenario, up a shield, Charizard can sweep so many games. We just recently had the Community Day Classic. You guys should definitely have a Charizard by now, and it's well worth the Elite Fast TM. Because to be fair, there's not really a ton of Pokemon which require the Elite Fast TM, which are quite worth using. Of course, Poliwrath with the counter, and this one are the 2 most recent ones. But generally speaking, I think Wing Attack is just an absolute must-have. Charizard on any given team, even if it's a team of triple waters, you're still going to be able to do a ton of damage, and I highly recommend this Pokemon. Heliolisk, a bit of a meme Pokemon. Machamp is a very interesting one. I've had this Pokemon built for a long time. If you get it lined up on a good matchup, it can be quite good. But even things like Machamp versus Walrein, 2 Icicle Spears get you very, very low. So I just don't really think it's that worth it, to be completely honest with you, at this current moment in time. I think if you're going to build a counter user, you definitely build Poliwrath. XL Alolan Ninetales can be quite a cool one, but of course you will have to invest quite a lot of XL candy. And from memory, building a less optimal one will be quite costly. This is a hundo, going to be very difficult to get the candies for this one. Sneasler is a Pokemon I've been looking at building. This one is level 27 to 32. Not a Pokemon that you ever really see in the Ultra League, to be completely honest with you. But it looks like it is quite unique. Shadow Claw, Close Combat, Aurelius, beating Trevenant, Cobalion. Of course, Close Combat looks to like almost one-shot most steel types. This is a pretty attack-weighted Pokemon as well. Beats a lot of your Walrein, Swamperts. Does lose to Charizard and Jellicent, of course. Not really a Pokemon that I would recommend building, but I think it's quite a cool one for sure. Once again, Clefable is a Pokemon that has a 1 kilometer body. It is going to be between level 42 and 50. Interesting fact about this Pokemon. Depending on what the IVs are, will depend on if you win CMP against it with Alolan Sandslash. And believe it or not, Alolan Sandslash being a steel type, you actually just simul KO in the zeros, which is quite a funny one. I think this is a tricky meta for this Pokemon with, like I said, all of the steel types, but you're seeing the Meteor Mashes are hitting the Walreins, Cobalions with the Moonblast, destroying the dark types in the meta. There's a ton of poison dark types. The poison types can be a little bit tricky for this Pokemon, of course. So I think Clefable, it's one that you put sort of towards the bottom of the list, and yeah, it's a good Pokemon, but I just don't think it's really Clefable's time, unfortunately. So we're starting to get pretty low here. XL Abomasnow, no, I don't think you go for that. Blastoise, I don't think so. Florges, no. Como-O could be a decent one, but I just don't think it's really that great at the current moment. Obstagoon, I think, is a great pick for the Ultra League. That should be one of your main fighter builds. It's like a pseudo-fighter, Night/Cross Chop. You can, of course, go for the Community Day move, which we had quite recently, of Obstruct, which can be a real nuisance. It absolutely walls off Trevenant, Jellicent. Believe it or not, with Dragon Breath, Giratina actually beats Obstagoon, but you're beating the Swamperts. Again, I think if you bring these into further shielding scenarios against things like Pidgeot, I think you probably do win these matchups. Obstagoon, it's just really a nuisance. Okay, so we do lose this one, unfortunately. I think assuming that you shield up Feller Dances, if you do make a call, I'm sure you can flip that matchup. If you try to call a Brave Bird Bait, which is pretty easy to call, to be fair. Obstagoon, I think, is just a great option. It's level 35.5 to 47. If you had a level 40 Obstagoon, I think you'd be absolutely chilling. cost you maybe 250k dust plus the move. I think this is definitely a pretty decent Pokemon, and certainly one of the first Pokemon that I built. Again, XL Politoed, not really worth it. Samurott, you're safer with Swampert or another Hydro Cannon user. Abomasnow, no. Tentacruel, very unique core breaker, but quite an expensive Pokemon. And in fairness, if I had a look at these matchups, you really do need to build a high rank one for this to be any good. Cofagrigus, not really worth it. Trevenant, Cofagrigus is good, mind you, I'm not saying it's bad. However, I just don't think, yeah, 47.5 to 50, not really what you would call a budget build. Trevenant, however, I think you can definitely get away with building this Pokemon level 40, and I think this should be one of your main budget builds as well. It just has a lot of play. Generally speaking, even against some of its worst counters like Charizard, if you get a little bit ahead in energy, let's say for example, you get ahead by 2 Shadow Claws, they get to the Blast Burn in 7 and then 6, right? You get to the Shadow Balls in 7, and you do have an opportunity to beat the Seed Bomb as well. So like a Shadow Ball will absolutely wreck a Charizard and leave you in a position where you can farm it down. I've had so many situations where I'm against a Charizard and Trevenant still somehow pulls it off. As you can see, you're doing very well against Tapu Fini, Giratina, Cresselia, Cobalion. You're going to be taking out all of the water types, which are pretty common. Of course, any fighter, Toxicroak, Cobalion, Virizion. So it's the grass type that beats other grass types, which is amazing. Beats the Venusaur, beats a lot of these ground steel types, beats Granbull, Caesar, Golisopod. It's interesting that it actually beats Golisopod, considering that you're getting super effective Shadow Claws against you. Again, Registeel, they're probably going to debuff you. You can eat a Zap Cannon super comfortably, and if you take this into like any shielding scenario, you basically beat Reggie. Scrafty is a little bit tricky, but as you see here, guys, it's not that bad. At 489 rating, it's like fairly even. Like I think about 3 Seed Bombs takes out Scrafty, so like it's not even that bad. You can definitely put in a lot of chip. With the Icicle Spear buff, Walrein does take it. However, I think if you bring this into further shielding scenarios, it can get quite close, and up energy, you can definitely beat Walrein. So still a super strong Pokemon despite the nerf, and I think this Pokemon is probably very, very high up on my list of Pokemon that you should build. Again, we're getting into some muddy waters now at this point. Lantern, XL, Talonflame, Nidoqueen, Galarian Weezing, Meganium. I think you go for Venusaur if anything. Like I said, Non-Shadow Dragonite. Another really nice budget pick here is Escavalier. It can be quite a nice core breaker because, of course, counter user. It has a steel bug typing, so it only takes neutral damage from flying, so things like Pidgeot. It can get completely wrecked by Charizards and things, but of course, every Pokemon has its weakness. As you're seeing here, it does really well against Ice, Normal, and Steel types in the meta, and it has quite a unique moveset of Mega Horn and Drill Run, and of course if you want to, you can use Aerial Ace or Acid Spray. I think these two moves are best, because it gives you the opportunity to beat things like Cresselia, which is a real nuisance Pokemon. Having a Pokemon with Mega Horn can be really good. Of course, this Pokemon has its problems, but I think even matches like Tapu Fini, you can get off quite a lot of damage. You should be able to outpace the 2 Drill Runs over 2 Surfs, right? So like you can get off a lot of damage. Generally, Escavalier is a very good Pokemon. I wouldn't really put it super high up, but I think you probably build Escavalier before you build something like Machamp. And if you do happen to have the candies, level 30 to 40, pretty decent honestly, or if you trade it, you can evolve it for free. Lapras, I don't see it honestly. It could be fun, but I just don't really see it. Toxicroak, this Pokemon is between level 40 and 50. Just out of curiosity, I want to have a look to see how this goes. So with the attack weighted one, you actually pick up Golisopod, which is quite an interesting one. For breakpoints here, yeah, you're getting a ton of breakpoints, doing a lot more damage to Mandibuzz, Obstagoon, Poliwrath, which could be quite vital. You're farming down the Sandslash a lot faster, maybe giving them less chance to get off a Drill Run, which of course would look to take you out. Scrafty, Snorlax, and Walrein. Snorlax, not a Pokemon that you very often see. Yeah, you just lose an absolute ton of bulk points. However, in a straight up match, you're losing Charmander and Ninetales, Swampert, and Toxicroak itself. So this Pokemon, it definitely looks like it suffers quite a lot from not having XL Candy. You do pick up Toxicroak in the 2s, and you pick up Toxicroak in the 0s, but I think in general, all of these lost bulk points could be kind of rough. So I think it's a very unique Pokemon, this one. If you think about what it's going to look to beat, it's going to beat the Scrafties, Obstagoons, anything that's normal or weak to counter. And it actually does very well against some of the counters to the Steel types as well. Of course, beating Swampert, you've got a Sludge Bomb for the Virizion, Sludge Bomb for the Trevenant. Could be quite a decent Pokemon, but I think you probably do want to build it XL, to be completely honest with you. Again, Venusaur, it's a good Pokemon, but I think it's quite a hostile environment for Venusaur currently. Definitely not a bad Pokemon to have, and it's probably one of your best sort of budget grass type Pokemon. So if you do want to build a couple of grass types, you can definitely just build this with real IVs. Sirfetch'd could be an interesting one, not one that you're going to see that often. Once again, we're getting into some very sketchy territory here now. Chestnut could be quite an interesting core breaker for sure, with Frenzy Plant and Superpower. Drapion is another Pokemon you could go for a semi-XL build of. I would highly recommend going for fully XL, but Jamie Finn here actually has his Pokemon build as a Hundo, so it is possible. There are some great players using a Hundo Pokemon in the Ultra League that are typically XL. You win CMP, you probably get some break points, you maybe lose some bulk points, but I think it still can perform very well, and it is a really good safe swap. Likewise with Skuntank, this one's a little bit higher level, it's level 44.5 as a minimum, so if you built a Hundo or a Purified one, it could be like a semi-XL build, but I think you do definitely want to go for an XL build of Skuntank, and I think you go for Flamethrower as opposed to Trailblaze. Another Pokemon you could take into consideration as a Dragon type that uses Counter, which is quite unique, is Haxorus. It has Breaking Swipe, debuffing a lot of opponents, and of course Night Slash or Earthquake. Sometimes they do like to run this with Earthquake. As you can see, it does very well once again against Steel types, and it does well against Swampert. However, it does struggle against even Giratina. I would definitely put this more into the secondary Pokemon that you would build. I wouldn't think, oh, let me just build this Haxorus right now. It's definitely a really cool Pokemon. I would not tell you that you have to build this Pokemon right now. So hopefully that gives you guys some ideas. Blaziken can be pretty fun, right? A lot of these Pokemon are very XL'd, and such as the League. The Gyarados is pretty decent Pokemon. Again, it's pretty hostile with Dragon Breath at the moment. Skeledirge actually, I think, is a very interesting pick. I'm happy I came across this before the end of the video, because the interesting thing about it is, it's a ghost type that is able to beat dark types, as you can see, and of course beats a lot of the... Actually, Giratina somehow beats it, but I think if you probably shield up a little bit, you can look to maybe get that very close. Walling Cresselia, Cobalion, Walrein, and of course, you're just doing a ton of damage against the steel types. I think Skeledirge, it's only a level 28.5 to 36.5. I think it could be a very nice fun pick, and it's a whole new Pokemon for you to try out. I think you could definitely try that one. Muk is a Pokemon here, level 33 to 44. Definitely one of the better non-XL Pokemon that you can max out. And I think at that point, guys, like I said, we're starting to get into some muddy waters here. Snorlax, Oinkologne, Excadrill. Definitely some less optimal Pokemon here. We're definitely getting into some funnier Pokemon here, and I think we've definitely covered the main Pokemon. One Pokemon that I completely forgot to mention is Ampharos. This Pokemon is such an annoying Pokemon, to be honest with you, because a lot of teams have Jellicent and Tapu Fini, and this thing is just super, super annoying. It can actually do quite well against Trevenant and Cresselia. However, if you safe swap this Pokemon right, you get the extra Volt Switch through and definitely take these matchups. I thought I'd mention this Pokemon because it's an absolute bag of tricks. I mean, good luck TMing the correct moves on it, but Trailblaze beating the Swamperts and Brutal Swing for the coverage I think is amazing. I thought I'd throw that Pokemon in here as definitely a very unique core breaker that is very, very low cost. As you can see, level 31 to 41. I think Ampharos could be a cool build for you. Now, of course, I do recommend building some legendary Pokemon, and if you do have a lot of rare candies, legendary Pokemon are the best things to use rare candy on for Ultra League. I think Cresselia is definitely very good. Cobalion is definitely well worth it. If you do have Giratina, you can never go wrong with Giratina. Virizion, very strong pick. Tapu Fini was in raids quite recently, very good pick. Guzzlord we haven't seen in quite some time in raids. So hopping into like the tier list part of the video, these are definitely the top 5. I think in this current meta, Virizion, Cobalion, and Tapu Fini are amazing. If I had to build one, I would build Virizion, and I actually just recently did so. Cobalion is not a bad option, but I think with any of these 5 Pokemon, you can't really go too far wrong. Tapu Fini core breaks Steelixes. Virizion does very well against a lot of teams currently, and so does Cobalion. Giratina is just so bulky and annoying that you can't really ever go wrong with it. Even if you're against a fairy type, Giratina can do well against basically any Pokemon. And again, Cresselia is a super annoying Pokemon that beats most Pokemon except for, of course, Steel types, and of course Ghost types and Dark types, but you have Moonblast and you have Grass Knot, which is amazing coverage, and you can't really go far wrong with that. So I think building any of these 5 Pokemon is well worth your rare candy, and you really cannot go wrong with these Pokemon. Now, these are the Pokemon I would consider the main build options. Poliwrath, Charizard, Shadow or Non-Shadow is both fine. Trevenant, Swampert, Shadow, Non-Shadow fine. Obstagoon, a Alolan Muk I think is better than a regular Muk currently. Gliscor, Walrein, Golisopod and Dragonite. And I would put them roughly in this order. It's debatable depending on what you need, but I think Poliwrath is super, super strong right now. Again, you just can't go wrong with Charizard. Even in bad matchups, it does super well. Trevenant I think is a really good core breaker. Swampert is probably the best Hydro Cannon user, and that's why I would put it up here instead of things like Greninja. Obstagoon, really bulky, super annoying. You can go with Cross Chop, you can go with Obstruct, just a very good utility Pokemon. Likewise, if you're looking for a cheap Poison Dark type Pokemon, Alolan Muk, you can't really go too far wrong with that either. Gliscor, a unique core breaker in the meta, and I think has a lot of play against the Steel types, and of course, things like Virizion, it can do quite well against. Walrein, probably your best budget Ice type, and one of the best Ice types in the entire league. You definitely can't really go too far wrong with Walrein. Golisopod and Dragonite, both really good options, and I think these are definitely worthy of some of your best top 10 Pokemon to build as a budget user. Now hopping into semi-XL Pokemon, I'm not saying that you should build these as semi-XL Pokemon, but I'm just letting you know that it is an option. We did go through some of these. I don't necessarily recommend Toxicroak. I think you might be fine with Stuntank and Steelix, and Drapion most likely, and even with Greedent. Greedent is mainly used as a safe swap, to spam a bunch of body slams and offer some protection for another Pokemon weak to counter in the back. So I don't think you necessarily need to be like running this level 50, but I'm just letting you know that these Pokemon are options as semi-XL Pokemon. Skuntank would be the most expensive one at level 44.5, but I think if you've done a semi-XL Steelix, you would probably be fine, right? It's such a strong Pokemon, you're debuffing things anyway, and you're probably getting some attack break points, which is helping you overcome things like Swampert and Virizion, so I think you're absolutely fine there. And like I said, if you're just trying to get yourself your first team in the Ultra League, you don't really have to worry about it for now. I think in the future you'll most likely regret it, and you'll probably start building it again, so build it at your own risk, I would say. And finally guys, more of your secondary Pokemon that you could build for like a core breaker, or just as a meme pick, or something that like fills a hole in your team, right? Ampharos just core breaks so many teams are double or triple weak to it. Greninja, if you don't have a Swampert and you've done the community day, could be a good option. Escavalier and Haxorus is your counter users, and of course Machamp, if you just so happen to have it. Skeledirge, once again, unique core breaker, has a really unique typing and moveset. Gyarados can be quite a fun one, with Aqua Tail of course requires an elite TM. Definitely not one that I would highly recommend, but it can be quite strong in certain scenarios. Venusaur, always going to be a good Pokemon in any league, even the Master League, it's very good and can core break some teams. Como-O, I highly recommend checking out Yasser Lead's video. He was showcasing Como-O last season, and he was having a ton of success with it, so this Pokemon can be very good. And of course, like we mentioned, Aurorus, a very, very good ice type. It is double weak to counter, which is quite rough with the rock typing, but it can go insane if you get it ramped up with Meteor Beam, and I think it's just unfortunate for this Pokemon that the meta is super dominated by probably counter users and steel types at the current moment, and of course things like Swampert. Anyway guys, that is my video. I hope you enjoyed it, man. It took a long time to put this together, and I'm sorry it's a like 30-minute video, but I think we covered a lot of angles. I know I definitely forgot something, so do let me know in the comment section down below, and try to help everybody else in the comments. If you have any Pokemon that you would recommend building that I haven't covered in today's video, definitely put that in the comment section, it would help out somebody, I'm sure. Thank you very much everybody, have a fantastic rest of your day, hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll catch you all next time.